Now, for more on the economy of Ukraine and Central Europe, I'm joined by James Jatras, a media and government relations specialist and attorney. James is also a former U.S. diplomat and former senior foreign policy advisor to the U.S. Senate's Republican leadership. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So let's start with this IMF report talking about Europe's growth being more sustainable. What's driving Europe's growth right now?
To tell the truth, I don't know, and I have to tell you, I'm a little skeptical of the numbers. When the IMF says that Europe's growth is going to be better than America's growth, and we just finished 2 quarters annualized at over 3%, but they're only talking about 2.5 or so, 2.2 for Europe. We'll see. I mean, I don't know how we're lower than that, but of course, China is projected to be doing very well. India, I think there are a lot of places that are going to be doing very well over the next year. Maybe Europe will be part of that.
So then why do you think the IMF has so much optimism about Europe's growth prospects?
Honestly, I think there, as we'll mention when we get to Ukraine, politics plays a role. Is that I think there is a little element of cheerleading here that maybe is coming from the IMF. As I say, I'll take it with a grain of salt.
And speaking of grain of salt, what's happening with Brexit? A lot of people, including the IMF, they're warning about a disruptive Brexit. Just how much of an impact are the Brexit negotiations and the kind of stalemate that we're seeing having on the European economy?
I think it adds to the uncertainty that we've seen over the past few years over not only the stability of the euro, but what's going on in Catalonia, the rise of populist parties, many countries in the EU. There are a lot of things that are not strictly speaking economic, but have an impact on economic perceptions and the confidence of consumers and producers alike.
And we're certainly seeing a lot of that spillover. Now let's also look at Central Europe. It's interesting because they've seen the fastest expansion in 9 years. What should we be keeping an eye on there?
I think there are a number of things. For one thing, as again, when we get to Ukraine, is there is the question of the energy picture. What are we going to see in terms of transport of Russian natural gas, coal, and so forth? But I think there's this maybe in some sense also is reflected, maybe indirectly, of the rise of populism in some of these countries, that they are feeling confident, they're feeling their oats. So I think this probably has an impact on their economic expectations.
Now, as we look at Ukraine, how would you characterize its current state of the economy?
Well, the IMF gave it a rather optimistic read, and I hope they're right. I really hope they're right. I suspect they are being overly optimistic. As we saw in the report about the buying of coal, they're going to buy more coal just to heat people's houses for purely political reasons, buying it from the U.S. or South Africa. And by the way, we've already seen some reports that some of this American or South African coal really is Donbass coal from eastern Ukraine that's been somehow routed around through Russia and coming back in as supposedly from somewhere else at much higher prices than it would be purchased from the Donbass directly. I don't know how you can sustain real economic growth when you're doing that just to keep people warm during the wintertime and ending with, let's hope it's a mild winter.
Now, we know that the government has enacted some reforms when it comes to energy and other things. What does the future hold for Ukraine then, given its current trajectory?
I think in the long and the short of it, it's not really going to be that much about Ukraine. It's going to be about what is the relationship between the EU and Russia. We saw when the Congress imposed a sanctions bill on President Trump that they tried to disrupt, essentially they were shooting at Nord Stream 2, trying to disrupt European economic relations with Russia. And I think it's pretty clear that Europe wants to improve its ties with Russia. I think Nord Stream 2 is going to get built. And at some point, Ukraine is not going to be the lucrative transit country for Russian gas. That's not going to be helpful to them either.
And speaking of sanctions, we know that the Ukraine imposed sanctions on 18 Russian companies. How do you see that either helping or potentially hurting its economy?
Unless Ukraine has plans to levitate itself up in the air and move itself elsewhere in the globe, I don't see how, for the long term, they can develop well without having a good relationship with Europe on the one side and then Russia on the other side. And it seems to me that's counterproductive.
And in terms of the challenges that you see for Ukraine's economy, how high does inflation rank, say, as opposed to the other issues that the economy is facing?
It's a concern. The IMF upped their estimate recently, another couple points. I think 12.5% is what they're expecting now, which is better. It's not as bad as it could be. It's still going to be a significant concern. But it also rates down to the other question, what's going to be done politically to solve the problem in the Donbass? And you still have the continuing threat of a flare-up in hostilities, which will have unpredictable negative effects.
So given the issues that Ukraine is facing, if you had to pick what should be perhaps the first priority, where should they start?
Peace, that rather than trying to bank on enmity between the West and Russia because it fits into the political needs of the current political leadership in Kiev, they should be looking for what always has to be Ukraine's priority, which is to be the country in the middle, to have peace on both sides. And it seems to me that the current leadership there is not capable of doing that. And we are seeing increasing political turmoil, especially a big coalition building against the current president, Petro Poroshenko. And it even could get violent, and nobody wants that.
Certainly a very unfortunate situation we're seeing unfold. Thank you so much, James Jatras, Media and Government Relations Specialist and Attorney.